Welcome to Borderlines. You have just Steve and I today. We are going to do our best to try and interpret and offer some commentary about the recent announcement about the government's most latest attempts to cut the permanent residency, temporary residence, refugee programs going into the new year. There's a lot to discuss here, and it's sort of taken the immigration world by storm. You know, we've been saying for a while that it's feeling a little bit like what's happening is the death by 1,000 cuts, and about 700 new ones came just overnight. So we're just going to try and make our way through it. I'm starting off with just a discussion about how did we get to where we are right now. Of course, because this all is just so fast breaking, we haven't had a lot of time to really organize our thoughts, but we just want to dive in a little bit. And then try and segregate a little bit to have a discussion about the temporary residence programs, the permanent residency programs. But I think this is going to, in some ways, end up pulling upon some of the discussions we've had in episodes over the past year. So we're probably going to be making those references and maybe reposting some of our older episodes too, because it shows some of those discussions really coming very much to the forefront in what's happening these days.
Yeah, so for those who don't know kind of what Deanna is referring to, yesterday the Trudeau government announced that they were going to reduce Canada's immigration targets by about 20% through specific numbers released about every program. It came a bit as a surprise the day before the National Post first leaked, followed by several media outlets, that this was coming. And as Deanna said, it's kind of taken the world, the immigration world anyways, by storm. It's been picked up in international media, kind of with the perspective from what I've seen everywhere is Trudeau reverses course. Canada realizes what limits to immigration there are. And Deanna and I just want to kind of break through, as she said, how we got here and going through sort of what is the new plan. I should add, I guess, at the outset that, a lot of immigration stakeholders are kind of treating this as the culmination of things, but I would also view it as it's just one step in a process that is likely to continue, right? Like in last year, they released an immigration plan that has now been thrown out of the water.
Mhm.
This time next year, it is possible that there will be a different person leading the Liberal Party. It is possible that the Liberal Party will not be in government. And so what is announced today could change with another by-election loss by the, right? It's the
Mhm.
politics of the governing party being 20 points back in the polls means, in my opinion, that nothing is certain, especially as Deanna and I will get into, some of what is being discussed will lead to unintended consequences, or it's just not clear whether it's possible.
For sure. I mean, it strikes me that the starting point here is almost like, I'm reflecting back on when the IRPA, which is our current immigration legislation, came in. This is 2012, I think. Am I right, Steve?
2002.
Oh, 2002. So we're almost 22 years on the same piece of legislation. And the IRPA was set out like as what they call framework legislation. It's very bare bones. There's not a lot in the act itself. There's very robust regulations, but it's like, and so that's how it was set up in the first place. Most of it was in the regulations, very, very basic act. And then the regulations over time got hacked away and hacked away and hacked away and hacked away. And then in during the tenure of Jason Kenney's time as the immigration minister, and this was something that was sort of a focus of our conversation with him 2 episodes ago, there was the creation of ministerial instructions. And during this, again, the regulations almost took a back seat, and it was like all about ministerial instruction. That meant that changes could be made without the parliamentary process, and it could just be done kind of by edict, as I was saying when I was opposing that transition. Now it's gone even further, and a lot of it is just by policy bulletins. This is how we're going to interpret this now, as they did with the recent changes to the ICT and a bunch of other policy changes. So, um, this is part of what I was trying to put the gears to Minister Kenney about, this sort of like attrition of the rule of law and how like change was so fast and furious. And then this kind of gradual dismantling of the system that was the framework legislation with the robust regulations. I remember some of my colleagues, Gordon Maynard and Michael Green, always talking about how when they first tabled IRPA, saying, no, we need a much more structured system so that when we create an immigration framework, it's something that we can have consensus about, and we can have a system that is like subject to, is a democratically agreed upon thing, that this is going to be Canada's perspective on what immigration means, and what the values and the goals are of immigration. But the fact that we've seen so much of immigration over the course of the last, let's say, year dismantled really dramatically, and I know that there's been a lot of hyperbole, but a lot of it is quite warranted in my view. This dramatic dismantling that was possible to do within the space of a year is because of this radical dismantling of the rule of law that has happened over a longer period of time.
Yeah, I mean um that ability to both, well, so that's the kind of the legal underframing of what led to kind of the population growth patterns that also led to the announcement of a cut in immigration, with the goal actually being a reduction in population, which we'll get to. But basically, under the IRPA, the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, the government every year has to set an annual target for immigration. The Liberals actually made it a 3-year target, but it's an annual target of how many permanent residents will be admitted to Canada each year. This year is actually the first year that they are going to set targets for temporary residents, which we will get to as well. The reason for that, as we've covered extensively on the podcast, is that there has been a dramatic growth in the number of temporary residents, which they are measuring in as work permit holders and students. They aren't including visitors in that. Asylum claimants get counted as work permit holders because they get an open work permit when they've after they claim asylum. The the growth is, we've speculated, we've wondered kind of what caused that dramatic growth in 2022 and 2023. Was it that they kind of just didn't notice that schools were admitting record numbers of people, that businesses were hiring more foreign workers? Was it deliberately intended that they wanted to grow the economy through population growth? And we've had guests on the podcast previously. There's whole episodes where we've talked about that. Point is, the population soared, and it seemed like the government's attitude also was towards increasing targets. When Mark Miller, the current minister, came in, he said that he couldn't envision a world or see a world where Canada adjusted its immigration levels downwards. Earlier this year, the talk was about regularizing the status of undocumented people in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
We've completely swung the other way.
It's not just earlier this year, it's like weeks ago. Like weeks ago, truly. Like, I mean, maybe we're
Yeah.
talking 2 months. And so we're talking about sharp pivots, extremely sharp pivots. And I think something that Steve said is really important here about this, the notion of how targets are being managed, and how they're being set. Um, in terms of formulating an immigration policy and an immigration priorities, I remember, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, this notion of kind of managing the mix, like what are we going to try and accomplish in setting immigration priorities? This is what Minister Kenney spoke about as being kind of, during his tenure, a deliberate decision toward, to move toward what he called a human capital model. And that is this kind of idea that there are these very specific characteristics that we wish to bring into Canada. So everything in our immigration system started to move toward this like how many points do you get for age? How many points do you get for how many years of education, for language skills, and sort of treating entrance into the Canadian labor market and into the Canadian environment as like a series of attributes that you're trying to quantify and then to figure out, you know, and it ended up leading to creation of an algorithm. But even before we're talking about automating it, it's about like, what are the qualities that we want in the incoming Canadian? And that was very much based on this human capital model. Who's going to bring the greatest benefit economically to Canada? And it was very much the focus. But I think also there's something to be said here about this notion of temporary and permanent residency, like that the focus was not just on bringing in permanent citizens of Canada, but the kind of disarticulation of permanent people who were going to come and become part of our community, and those that were going to be here just for our use and then disposal, like, and so I think Minister Kenney was quite instrumental in saying, like, some will be allowed to stay and others will be here just for our specific use, and then with no intention for us to incorporate them into our communities. And
Yeah, they
so,
even, I mean, it never came into fruition, but they had passed a 4-year cap on being a foreign worker. So it
mhm,
was sort of like someone would arrive and they had 4 years to become a permanent resident. Now there were exceptions, but there were 4-year caps. That never, by the time the 4 years was up, there had been a change in government
right. But that
and
was there
it had
for a
gone.
while. I
It was there for
remember
like
him
four, it was there for
saying,
3 years, 10 months or something like
right,
that.
right, right. I
Like it
remember him
never
saying
reached
temporary is
4.
temporary, permanent is permanent. And um, so, I mean, again, the backdrop to all of this is what happened to this notion of Canada being a country of immigrants, like that everyone, like this national identity being that, like, this is a country of immigrants, that were built on newcomers, and that, and so I think at some point, this sort of disposable workforce ideology was created. And I think it has created a real tension in terms of how we regard people that are coming to Canada. Are you worth, and I've said this so many times on the podcast, good enough to work, good enough to stay, being the slogan that the caregivers used when they ended up advocating for their own permanent residency. I think that tension was spread across the entire immigration sector when that disarticulation happened. And again, I'm going to refer us to the episode we recorded with Professor Asha Koshal I think it's years back even, where she really kind of scrutinized this move toward the human capital model, what was gained and what was lost in that transition, because I feel like we're really seeing that come to roost at this moment.
Yeah. And the only other comment I guess I'll have before we get into the actual levels plan is that there was, as all this was going on, and there was this peak issue of rising housing costs, stories of dozens of people living in basements, who were international students, and this notion of, and it's funny, Deanna and I were talking about before how it's always kind of funny to see immigration lawyers or consultants giving economic analysis to the media when like we aren't economists. So all I'll do is I guess is comment on the two press releases or statements that the government would make and just say that it's hard to reconcile the two, which was that we've gone from growing the economy through population growth in as explicitly stated in IRCC press releases to yesterday's announcement, which was based on the notion that the economy needs to catch up to population growth.
Mhm.
I'll leave it to the economists. Maybe we'll have one back on to kind of explain how those two statements can be reconciled. But
Yeah.
that's sort of where we are now, and the rationale behind why they need to cut permanent
Do
residence targets.
exactly the opposite of what was their strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mikhail Skutterod, who we've had on the podcast before, published or posted a tweet or an X or whatever it's called, where it just shows a car driving in the highway, swerving, 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 being
100%.
this is what things are at.
Yeah, exactly. If you're confused, it's because it's confusing. I'm going to say
Mhm.
one more thing about this whole the the loss of the sensibility of the rule of law is the thing about the creation of, like, the fact that classes of immigrants existed. There used to be like the Canadian experience class, the federal skilled worker, the federal skilled trades, the family class. If you qualified in one of those categories that were created by statute and described in the regulations, that meant something. With the creation of ministerial instruction, express entry, policy, it started to mean nothing. And so, and I say that because you could have been qualified for federal skilled worker for the last 3 years and it not mean anything about being eligible to come into Canada, because regardless of whether or not you're eligible, you're never going to get an invitation based on the way that people are ranked and scored and all this kind of stuff. They might not even issue an invitation in that particular category. And so the law is kind of a farce. You could read the act and the regulations and be like, great, set me up. But there's this moving target that means that 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 you're going to be Godot waiting by the by the bus stop forever and ever. And that was by design. Minister Kenney had no qualms about that. Yeah, enough
Yeah.
said.
Well, while we're waiting for Godot, let's get into the best laid plans of mice and men and
Yes.
go through the levels plans targets. Those who are following along where they have access to a computer or phone, you can Google IRCC Supplementary Levels Plan 2025 to 2027. Every year they release the specific breakdown of the targets, which has a range for how they envision all of the different programs going. So the first kind of the big headline number is that the target absolute number of permanent residents, new permanent residents in 2025 is going to go from 500,000 to 395,000. Now there's ranges, the low that they expect, the high number. The target is going from 500 to 380. First thing I'll add on that, and we've commented on this before in the podcast, is that as they are reducing immigration numbers in absolute terms overall, they are not reducing the number of Francophones that will be immigrating outside of Quebec. And the target for 2025 is 8.5% of the immigrants outside of Quebec will be French speaking, going up to 10% in 2027. I don't want to rehash my thoughts on Francophone, the overall, numbers going to Francophones, other than that, it will be frustrating for people who are inside Canada, who are unable to qualify for permanent residence because the points are too high, to know that the points are much, 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 much lower for Francophones, simply because the government's actually struggling to even find the numbers to who are in Canada to let immigrate. I don't know if you have any thoughts on Francophone migration. We've kind of hashed it out before.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I have anything specific to add, but I do, I just, yeah, no, I think I need to hammer it one more time. I'm sorry, but like what we're talking about here is that people who are here in Canada, maybe have done a master's degree in Canada, maybe have a year or 2 years of Canadian work experience, are going to be passed over, instead giving an invitation to somebody who speaks intermediate level French, but may never have actually been in Canada, have no Canadian work experience, have no Canadian ties, may get here and not even like it. And so again, it's just to illustrate, because I think sometimes actual examples help
And
really make the
to give
point.
an example of the obsession, and again, I don't want to belittle it, but earlier this year, the government announced caps on the number of international students that would be allowed in Canada. They then couldn't help themselves. They introduced, I think it's somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 Francophone study permits Francophone study permits that are on top of the cap, that have reduced income requirements, which is bizarre because the income requirements are designed to make sure that students can afford to study here, and that has a direct pathway to permanent residence through a niche program that just seems to be based on people were Francophone and they studied here.
Yeah.
As you know, on one thing I'll just say, like for 20 in 2025, that's 29,325 spots will be reserved for Francophones who don't intend to immigrate. Pierre Poilievre, if he becomes prime minister, even without increasing overall targets, will please a lot of Canadian businesses and people in Canada who are currently here struggling to immigrate by just removing those spots and allocating them to the human capital model. And I know immigration consultants in the Indian community, for example, who are just livid about what they're seeing because, as Deanna said, they are they are people who are here struggling to immigrate.
Yeah. And it's like, I mean, I talked to a couple the other day, a brilliant couple. They're both like master's degree holding, and just like this one of the two members of this couple like wants to go on and do a PhD in Canada to do like earth sciences, like stuff we really, really need, and is planning on taking time out to get his French up to a CLB5 level. Like
For the work
just
permit, yeah.
it's just like really, this is what we're doing. Like it just feels like such monkey business, like what like it's like people are trying, like we're trying to put a square peg into a round hole just in order to like tick the box. No intention to work in a French speaking
No.
position. I mean,
But you
maybe that
can't
would
solve housing
happen.
and healthcare without Francophone.
I just
Anyway,
like I don't get it. Like, I mean, I'm very much like yay Francophone, like I agree with French language rights very strongly, but just this is your fix. It just is nonsensical to me.
yeah. So there
Yeah.
goes our non-rant
Yeah.
about the
Non-rant.
Francophone.
Yeah, we didn't do it.
Provincial nominees is the other big cut. Big,
Oh my
big cut.
goodness. Oh my
Going
goodness.
from it's going down by about 60%, from 110,000 to 55,000. In
This
the
bears a
last
lot of.
election, David Eby was the BC premier, was saying that he wanted to argue that BC should have more economic immigration powers. Nope, it's going to go down 60%.
So let's explain why PNP is such an important lever right now in the immigration process. I mean, what I can say is that, like, let's say you're here and you're, God forbid, in your 40s, which means your
You're
score
pointless.
sucks.
You're
Yeah,
pointless.
you're pointless. You're over the hill. You're no good to anybody, which to me is like, I mean, just for starters, they give a lot of points to the very, very young. And for me, the very, very young, very, very often have no intention of staying in any one place. They might just be passport collecting because they want to go here for a bit, have options open to them. But the 40-year-old population really wants to get that passport and settle down, buy their house if they can, or their condo or whatever the case may be, and set down roots. They have kids here, their kids
Yeah.
are integrated, like all this stuff. So they really are motivated to stay, and they really value getting that permanent residency. They've got very low points though. So what we would recommend, not just Steve and I, but like immigration practitioners across the country, is that you go to your province and say, if you're doing something that the province thinks is very valuable for your region, then ask the province to actually grant you a nomination. And so the provinces have discretion as to how they're going to use their nomination. So for BC, it will be that they're offering their nominations to the things that are the greatest skill shortages in BC. So healthcare providers, particularly those in the smaller urban centers where they're the greatest healthcare shortages. The maritime provinces are going to be more agriculturally focused. Every province knows what that province needs better than what the federal government does. And it's not just generalized. It enables more customization. But anyways, because the demand overall, there's fewer spaces overall, the need for provincial nomination has become so extreme that the demand for the provinces is so great. And so now, even there, when you try and get a provincial nomination, at this point in British Columbia, you kind of need to earn a six-figure salary in order to get a nomination. And
Yeah. So
so,
British Columbia ranks has its own point ranking system, and wage is actually the most important.
yeah, which maybe made sense before when the score was lower, where like even those in a 60, $70,000 range could still get a nomination because the score was lower. Now that it's really only the executive bunch, but then what about the people that are like, because the employers actually are wanting people that are going to do that middle kind of position. There are already options for the people at the upper executive level because they can get LMIA based permits and get 200
Mhm.
points maybe, but the ones that are in the middle are still screwed. And so like it's just further expanding this divide. And now if that number is going to get even lower, I just
By
don't even know.
60%.
Like less than half. I just don't know. I mean, Alberta, I think even closed its program at some point and was
Yeah, they
doing
hit
this.
quota.
They hit quota and they had this crazy thing where you had to like stay up all night and like try and log in and get in for the like these crazy systems that just mean that like access to justice, access um to ability, it's sort of
Yeah. It also highlights a bit of like how I think that this was relatively recent, the idea that there would be these cuts. In August, they were releasing public policies talking about how there would be work permit extensions for people in provincial nominee pools with the expectation that they would all be immigrating through the provincial nominee
for
program.
sure.
And 2 months later, the provincial nominee program is cut 60%.
Yeah,
I don't know what's going to happen with all these agreements that the
totally.
feds entered into with different provinces.
Yeah,
Anyway,
like think about these like people, these climate change scientists that are trying to get jobs, but their salary is not quite high enough because they're working in not for profit or like again, there's so many scenarios that I keep seeing where it's like, sorry, your post grad work permit is about to expire. You're not going to be able to get the nomination because you're not being paid enough and the employer can't pay you enough. Now there's going to be twice as much demand for that position, and your work
yeah.
permit's going to run out. Like, what are we going to do?
It's I don't it'll be interesting to see how the provinces respond.
Yeah.
What is going up is the Canadian experience class. So this is sort of the one saving grace. It's a bit hard to do an apples to apples comparison because before they would measure that federal high skilled would have 110,000. Oh, sorry, that's 2024. Federal skilled worker would have 117,500. In 2025, it is now federal economic priorities will have 41,700, and in Canada Focus will have 82,980. So the federal economic priorities are category draws and express entry, which is the francophones, trades, healthcare, things like that. And in Canada Focus, I think is just the rest of the CEC.
Yeah, I can't see that footnote. I don't know what
If you
that,
just I can go to the footnote quick to
yeah,
define
I don't
things.
know what the in Canada focus actually means.
So in Canada Focus is Uh, so in Canada, focus is Canadian experience class and other regional immigration pathways. So I guess like the
Okay.
rural northern immigration pilot,
Right,
but
right,
may
right.
also come from federal skilled workers and federal skilled trades. Part of why they may do that is because entrepreneurs don't qualify for the Canadian experience class. They may want to invite them through federal skilled workers. The other thing that is noteworthy, and again, it's going to be interesting to see sort of maybe the PMP adjusts to fill the void. Are the category draws next year are going to be limited to healthcare, trades, French. So they are dropping agriculture and they are dropping STEM, which is again, like in the summer of this year, they were talking about their global tech strategy all through 2023.
Yeah.
STEM has been dropped completely as a category specific draw. The cynic in me would say it's because they need the space for francophones. So they've just
Well,
chosen francophone over STEM.
so my suspicion here is that like there was the sort of, I mean, I don't know if I'm using the correct economic terms because I'm not an economist, as we mentioned, but like there was the like tech boom in the sense that like there were tech jobs and like this hard time that, my, you know, clients within our firm anyways were reporting of an inability to fill the positions within tech. And then all of a sudden we are seeing companies laying off tech workers. So whatever we're going to call that, that is something that at least anecdotally, and I think others have been seeing and clients have been reporting. But again, like there's a volatility in that market. Like it's like shortage and then, oh my God, tech workers. And then, you know, back down again. But like this is a 3-year strategy. Like, is there actually an expectation that the need for tech is going to continue to be low, or is it just that
Yeah, well,
at
they just
this
say it's
one particular moment?
2025. In 2025, they're dropping STEM. Some people on Twitter have speculated that it's a typo. I'd like
I
to give
see.
the government more credit than that. But it is just
Right.
noteworthy. And
I don't
agriculture, I
know.
guess, is solved.
Solved,
But
right? Yeah.
francophone is not. So, it will be,
Yeah, don't get
it's
it.
just,
I
I don't want
really
to
don't
go
get it.
into it again, but it's
Agriculture too,
the
but yeah.
francophone over
But
all
the
else.
agriculture one too, like I mean, what this the need for tech was just about the pandemic, and now we've pivoted and we're good. We don't need STEM anymore.
I
That's
don't know.
the
The other thing that it looks like, um, is because it's the word in Canada focus, federal economic priorities,
But wait,
there
Steve,
may
can I go
not be
back
a
to the in
skilled
Canada
worker job.
focus for a
Yeah.
second? 82,980 is the target for 2025. What was it for 2024?
So 2024, they didn't have this specific category. It was just
Okay, okay,
overall
of course.
express entry was 110,000.
So why did you say that this went up?
It went up because, well, it's just that right now it's about 123,000 is the target for 2025 for express entry, and the original plan was 117,000. So they are going to be allocating more spots to express entry, breaking it out, and actually targeting, it looks like much more Canadian
I
experience
see.
class. So
I
there
see what you're
is going to
saying.
be a push to transition foreign workers.
Okay. But still with a
Um,
diminishing number over the two
the
subsequent years,
diminishing number over the two
82 and then
subsequent years.
75 and then 70. So we're going to need fewer and fewer of the people that are here with Canadian experience. We're going to need fewer of them to stay on after
Yeah.
they've done their Canadian work experience, which
And the
again is an
STEM people will be
astonishing.
going back into the general draws. So there's a bit of uncertainty over what this looks like. It could be the bright spot for people who are in Canada, although as we'll discuss later, that the plan is for a lot of foreign workers to leave. But for some, there is the bright spot that
Okay.
Canadian
But
experience class at least will go up.
But can I just say again what I already just said, which is that like you just got your first open work permit after graduating. There's a lower chance you're going to get drawn in 2 years than there is even if you had your work experience right now. Because if now they're going to accept
Yeah.
82,000, in 2 years they're only going to accept 70,000.
So, I mean, we'll get to it. I think it's going to depend on how many people actually leave, right? So express entry is just supply and demand. There's so many people in the pool. Um,
The people that are going to leave are not going to be the people that have their work permits, open work permits, and an opportunity, the runway to try and qualify a Canadian experience class. Maybe the
hard
ones
to
that have already
tell.
run out.
It's possible those are also the people who probably have options elsewhere and may say F this.
So
Uh,
the best candidates are the ones that are going to be like, screw you.
well, yeah, like they have options. Anyway, we'll see. That's sort of the big the one, if you're a foreign worker in Canada, it's sort of the one bright spot is that CEC is going up. Will it go up enough?
Right.
That remains to be seen. And
Okay.
again, they're planning, we'll discuss this in more detail, on 1 to 2 million people leaving because of their changes.
Right.
Um, there's kind of the huge catch-all category of what they call the federal economic pilots, which includes the caregivers, the agri-food community immigration programs, economic mobility pathways. is going from 14,000 to 10,900. It's always hard to judge because there's so many programs lumped in there.
And also, there are existing backlogs that, like, does this mean new applications that are received in those years, or does that just mean that they still have 20,000 in the inventory and they're going to process the first 10,000 from that inventory this year and then the next 10,000 next year, and so they're
Well,
actually already full for the full 3-year complement.
yeah, could be.
So I have no idea. I think I mentioned, maybe I hadn't yet, that I had met with policy staff at the minister's office on the caregiver program. I don't know that that's ever going to see the light of day, because they were saying that they wanted it to be not through ministerial instruction, but through regulation. But again, with these numbers, 9,900 in 2016 and 2017, the idea of
I mean, 2020,
creating,
2020, 2026.
sorry, 2016, 2026, 2027. I can't imagine that there's room for an entirely new program that doesn't currently exist,
Yeah. Ooh,
especially when that's lumping in 6 other.
yeah. Spousal sponsorships going from 84,000 to 70,000. That's just backlogs, right? They can't control who Canadians marry. Uh,
Yeah, but again, I mean, this is something that's been talked about a fair bit, which is like, how can you cap that? And it's just, I think that you file in a year and the cap has already been reached. I believe they will just
yeah.
push your application to the next year.
Yeah. I mean, there've always been caps. There's always been targets,
Yeah.
and it's just the targets coming down. Ditto
Yeah.
parental sponsorship going from 34,000 to 24,500. I think that seals the deal on whether they'll open to new expression of interest next year.
Agreed. Because who knows how
And we'll
many are in
see.
the backlog right now?
Yeah.
Lots.
Refugees and protected persons is also going down, which will definitely disappoint those who believe Canada should be taking more refugees in. Um, let me make sure I've got these numbers. So for 2025, the protected persons in Canada abroad is going to go from 29,000 to 20,000. Government assisted refugees is actually staying the same. They didn't touch that. Um, Privately sponsored is going down 28,250 to 22,000. And yeah, so for overall reduction of for next year from 72,750 to 58,350, and then continuing to decline. We'll
Yeah,
see
I
what
could do a
asylum
whole
numbers.
podcast on this.
Well, go
Yeah.
for it. Go for it. Well, not a whole podcast, but
No, no,
you get
no,
you
no, no,
get two
no.
minutes.
Yeah. I mean, just like this, I've been very, very deep into this work right now. And um, the way that refugee claimants, both overseas and in Canada, are being dealt with. I think that there has been a real significant uptick in negative sentiment toward refugee claimants and refugees, which I find really disappointing and sad. The types of circumstances that are causing people to flee and come to Canada, and the things that they need to overcome in order to do so. Swimming across you know, bodies of water in order to escape death and persecution, in order to arrive, and then getting here and having people say, oh, if only I were a refugee, things would be much easier for me in terms of my immigration strategy. I do appreciate that there is fraud in this program. There's fraud in every program, but I think that I'm saddened to see the type of comments that I'm hearing from people in general about our tradition of accepting refugees. And I think that I think that when you look back over Canada's history, there have been a number of times, and I said this, in fact, in a conversation with a politician recently, there have been a number of times in Canada's history where Canada has said no to people fleeing disasters. Um, and then has spent generations apologizing for the treatment of those people, saying no to boats trying to arrive in Canada, sending Japanese Canadians to internment camps, and then apologizing. That was wrong. That was harsh. We're sorry we weren't more accommodating. I feel like we are setting ourselves up for that. People are actually trying to flee for their lives, and we are making it next to impossible with the use of again, I'm going to refer us to the episode we recorded on the use of what's the episode that I'm trying to refer to? You know, about the use of technologies to try and keep people from
Petra
crossing
Molnar.
borders. Petra Molnar. You know, it's a really scary science fiction-y kind of world that prevents. We have signed these conventions and the Convention Against Torture, the convention, the Refugee Convention, and I feel that Canada is truly not living up to its obligations and not being honest about it. And so,
Yeah.
enough
Only
said.
thing I'll add, and it's a good segue into the next category, 20,000 protected persons in Canada. According to Nicholas Kyung, in August, there were 186,000 asylum claims pending. Obviously, not all of those will be approved, but that also doesn't include family members, which the figures in the supplementary levels does.
Mm.
So if, and again, but this won't include, again, it's 186,000. Let's just say they're all approved. 20,000 a year, that's a 9-year permanent residence processing time after a successful refugee claim. If half are approved, it's a 4.5-year processing time for permanent residence after a refugee claim, which can include, family members being overseas.
Yeah, and
Um,
often does. And often it does, and those family members are not in any way safe. They're like fleeing in danger for their lives. And the person who's here and has succeeded can't visit them, is taking these phone calls if they can even reach them, and can't do anything to protect sometimes children that are there by themselves. Like
yeah.
it's truly a form of torture.
And the last category, which will be backlog galore, H and C is actually going up from 8,000 to 10,000, but the original plan was 8,000 in 2024 or 2025 and then 2026. Now it's 10,000 2025, 6,900 in 2026, 4,300 in 2027.
Oh,
That includes all humanitarian and compassionate class applications, as well as measures for Ukraine, Sudan, Hong Kong. There was also the program for people from the Western Hemisphere. There are 300,000 Ukrainians who at least came to Canada under the CUAET alone. Um,
who pretty much like, I mean, there of course will be exceptions, but those are to be counted not among the refugee numbers for the most part, but more often than not under the H and C category. So I think that that's a common misconception from the public.
yeah, the processing times
They
are
mean
just gonna
nothing.
soar. Like
Yeah.
I have no idea. Well, this is just gonna, especially with reductions elsewhere, and more people likely doing the humanitarian and compassionate class as well. Like this government, there's a Gaza is not a PR program, but there's the Sudan program. There's, they've got open work permits for Iranians for 3 years that are going to expire. There will likely be, well, as I said, 300,000 Ukrainians if they're doing 6,900, well, 10,000, like the potential backlogs for humanitarian and compassionate class cases are going to soar. And it's worth noting like that historic backlogs have often been huge for some categories. Like it's not like they'll just let the situation reach this. I remember when before Kenny closed the parent and grandparent program, as he was saying, the scariest moment for him was closing that program to new applications. That was like a 10-year backlog, um, which could be what H&C humanitarian and compassionate goes to.
Hmm.
So
I gotta say too, though, like don't count on it being a long backlog. I just got an H&C refusal today on an application that was in process for a very short period of time. I think there might be a very concerted effort to avoid backlogs by just hasty refusals. And then, nope, sorry, you do not meet the requirements. Yes, that's something that can lead to an application for judicial review, but many, if not most, people will not be able to afford that. And the federal court is already beside itself overloaded with these types of complaints, these types of applications for judicial review. And so again, we just have to consider the access to justice issues because, yeah, they're beyond
Time
capacity.
will tell.
Yeah,
So that's permanent residence. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on permanent residence.
I don't think so.
So temporary residence, the first time they've done targets for this.
Actually, the only
Um,
thing we wanted to talk about here was just this notion of the projection of trying to decline population growth. I think you've said that actually, though. I think we,
yeah, I think we'll cover that after temporary residence because that kind of
okay,
ties into temporary residence. And that's
okay,
sort of a good way to like, kind of conclude with is
yeah.
whether it's going to impact like their plans and these forecasts are based on something that they are forecasting that I don't know if it's accurate. But
Hmm.
temporary residents, for the first time, they are going to try to track this. Students will be 305,900 every year. Uh, yeah, students will be 3,590 a year. Workers is going to decline dramatically from 600 367,750 in 2025 to 237,700. Of this, the temporary foreign worker program will be 82,000 per year. That's the program where companies have to show that the entry of a foreign national will have a positive or neutral impact on the Canadian labor market. It's the program that's gotten quite a lot of flack in the media. Mike Moffat was on the podcast. He's called for it to be the low wage stream of it to be abolished. Right now, in Vancouver, it's not possible to get an LMIA, or this may take effect November too, but an LMIA for jobs that pay less than 20% more than $28, so 34 odd dollars. I just thought it was interesting. They're not planning on reducing that program each year, like they are with the International Mobility Program, which will,
Let's pause with the temporary foreign worker program for 1 second here.
yeah.
Does anybody that you've ever met or spoken to think that the labor market impact assessment process is a quality assessment?
So there's two subsets. Global Talent Stream, I've heard good things about. That's kind of for STEM positions, where instead of recruiting, it's like the opposite. Instead of recruiting and showing you couldn't find a Canadian, companies have to commit to job hiring. The process of showing that you couldn't find a worker, I think, is I think it
It's a
has
laughing
much more
stock.
negative. Yeah, like, well, I mean, for me, the big one is well, there's just all sorts, like to retain existing employees. I think the fact that there needs to, I understand why they want companies to recruit,
Hmm.
but the result is just a lot of employers who don't want to be recruiting and a lot of job seekers who are applying for jobs where the
It's just
employers
the
don't want to be
rigid
recruiting.
definition of what
Yeah.
recruitment looks like. It's so, I mean, just to like for those who aren't in this kind of world, it's like you must place 3 ads. They must be on 3 certain websites, and they're not websites that actual job seekers use, and it must be like one does this and one does that, and the third does this, and they must be up for 30 days prior to, and like the rules are so like, and this is, I mean, I make the joke all the time, but like if you're actually trying to comply with the requirements for an LMIA job ad, they're so absurd. You think it's a joke. Um,
Well, let's talk like even job match. So to hire
oh
a
my God.
foreign worker through this, the companies have to advertise on something called Job Bank, which has a feature called Job Match. And Job Match ranks people who are looking for jobs who have registered with the system. I think it's a lot of people in Express Entry as well as people on EI. And the employers get told they have to invite people, but all they're getting told about the people, they don't get a name, they get a number, and they just basically get told they're a 1-star match, a 2-star match, a 3-star match, a 4-star match, a 5-star match. The employer doesn't really know why. the candidate then gets this thing being like, hey, this employer recommends that you apply. They do, but then the star ranking doesn't really mean anything. Anyway, there's just
It
the
means something
program,
like you might say that there are 13 job duties or 14 skills required. And the one that they might have that gets them the 1 star is that you are a detail-oriented person,
right?
but
Like
none of the
it's
other skills that you have, right? But you're inviting them to apply and then
oh,
wasting your time looking at a person who has none of the basic education, training, or work experience requirements.
yeah. So that whole program needs to shift. I actually wonder if they took
It
it
needs
out
to be
of
thrown in the garbage.
if
Yeah.
they took it out of Express Entry.
But again, like you need to go through this to get points in express entries. So like
Well, that's
it's like, what are we doing? Why are we
That's part of
entrenching a
what's missed
system?
also is that a lot of the griping about companies getting LMIAs is you actually need it to help your workers get permanent residence. So,
Even though it's like they're already with you, and now you have to
yeah,
go through this charade of recruiting for somebody. And like, yes, of course, if there were a Canadian you can replace them with, but
yeah.
like
So there's a stats. There's yeah. Anyway, that's going to be flat.
silly rules.
The
Yeah.
big one and the one that I think is not realistic, the International Mobility Program will go from 285,000 to 155,000 by 2027. That includes the people who don't require labor market impact assessments, including work permits based on agreements with other countries, work permits under any economic classes, bridging open work permits, open spousal work permits, both for spouses of foreign workers and spouses of Canadians, work permits under humanitarian public policies, which includes the refugee claimants, and postgraduate work permits.
Hmm.
There is no way that those numbers that they've targeted can happen unless they just reclassify other workers into a new stream.
Well, but this is why this explains why, because they remember the death by 1,000 cuts, they started by like, oh, now students of bachelor and da 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 can't have their spouses come and all this kind of stuff. It was directly leading into this that now certain people can't bring their spouses when they come to study, or that certain kinds of workers can't bring their spouses, even though they just created the program that allows people to bring their spouses. It's just to keep the numbers down. But
Mhm.
again, from a policy perspective, like what is the benefit there? Because let's say I was going to come as a worker and I was going to have my spouse here. Does that actually now I can't have my spouse here? Does that fix the housing issue? Because I still need a house, whether there's going to be two of us in it or one of us in it.
Yeah.
I still need a car, but now I'm going to be driving it by myself rather than with my spouse. Like it doesn't actually address the demand on housing, but it means that now I'm going to have to stretch my income to cover two rents, one here and one for my spouse who's now like living abroad. So again, the kind of nonsensical nature of how they're going to try and meet these targets is by separating families and creating a ton more financial strain on each family unit by
Oh, it's like you don't even have to go that like so this is sort of 285,000, 128,000. As we mentioned earlier, refugees, 180,000 with open work permits. That's more than the total 2026 target. 300,000 Ukrainians with work permit. Like
right.
the numbers do not add up. So
Okay.
either they plan on just saying no more work permits for these categories to try to incentivize people to leave, or they know the numbers don't make sense. This is sort of to me the big
Yeah,
question
yeah.
mark is like what
So then they go on welfare. So that's better for our
and
economy that
like
they
so
go on
Kusma you're not
welfare.
yeah like Kusma you're not allowed caps. So just where they're and so they say elsewhere that we don't have a target on asylum claimants, but we do include them in the calculations. Does that mean in some years there would be what, like, in order just if there's an increase in asylum, there would be no postgraduate work permits that year? There's something is not so unless there's going to be big reclassifications to be like asylum claimants can work without work permits. Um,
Right, I see.
Ukrainians can work with that maybe one way, so there'll either be a weird stats manipulation
Yeah,
or the
exactly.
numbers just aren't doable.
I mean, we saw it at the beginning of the pandemic where it took months and months and months for them to issue the work permit to refugee claimants, which meant some more, I'm sure, went on to welfare because they needed to survive, which is a basic human right while they're in the claims process, presumably. Or they worked under the table, which made them exceedingly vulnerable to employers who knew that they were working without authorization. Like, again, it's like creating, like, it's so foreseeable that we're creating these other problems. It's not that they don't still require a, a way of earning a living. And it's actually preferable because it's part of the healing process for people to start getting back to work, starting to find some type of normalcy. Um, and it also helps fill labor market shortages. Anyways,
You know
I
what?
feel a rant coming on.
The more that I talk, the more that I'm convinced that's what's going to happen. They're going to move. Here's my prediction for 2025. Usually we save this for our episode with Tamara. My
Yeah,
prediction is for 2025, asylum claimers are going to get told that they can work without work permits under
right.
186 of the regs,
That'd
and
be
they're going
nice.
to try to shuffle as many people as they can to achieve their stats.
So again, it just means nothing. It's just about,
That's
yeah, it's just
That's
about
the
data
only way
manipulation.
I think it'll be a data manipulation.
Yeah.
I can't criticize them for doing this because they haven't done it yet. But that's the only way I can see these numbers making sense is if they, and there's a history of this because as we talked about with Mike Moffat under the Harper government, they split the foreign worker program into the international mobility program and the temporary foreign worker program. And all of a sudden there were media articles about how the temporary foreign worker program was like, there were half as many foreign workers.
Yeah.
So there could be, that's
I
my
do
prediction.
criticize them because right now the data in itself is generating this feeling like, oh, refugee claimants are going to take our spots. And so it's not neutral. The data is not neutral because it tells a story and it's already getting blowback where it's like, um, you know, it's coming out at a moment where we're already seeing headline after headline about immigrants stealing our houses, not about immigrants building our houses,
Yeah.
which is the case, which is why they created pilot projects to help bring in those, the people that are here with no status to become legalized construction workers because of the demand and the inability of that industry to actually meet the demand. So again, it's a Bizarroville game, but it's feeding in to this kind of populist notion that immigrants and newcomers are or will be stealing our jobs, including refugee claimants, which to me is a dangerous narrative,
Hmm.
dangerous and untrue.
And so here we go. The big chart that we'll link to along with all this in the show notes, the net change in newcomers to Canada, which is a chart that I haven't seen published before. And what they are anticipating is in essentially in 20, so what's the easiest way to do this? So in 2024, about, I'm going to round to the nearest whole number, 588, the nearest thousand, 588,000 non-permanent residents will leave Canada. In 2025, it'll be 1.262 million. 2026, 1.105 million, in which they are anticipating that the total, so at the bottom, in 2024, there will be a total of migration to Canada. So net migration of permanent residents and foreign workers coming in 2024 is 784,000. In 2025, 51,000 people will leave Canada versus coming in. In 2026, 66,000 will leave. That bulge of people who are leaving because of the numbers, these measures will end, and in 2027 it will be net back to a net gain of 382,000. Point being, if that was all just a bunch of stats, they are hoping and planning that between 1 to 2 million people will leave Canada as a result of these measures presumably because they are not able to obtain permanent residence and they run out of ways to stay in Canada as temporary residents.
This actually reminds me, I was listening to Althea Raj's podcast from the Toronto Star, and she featured a clip where Mark Miller said, you know, the situation is that we're in is it's a bit of a mess. So, my translation for this is kind of like, oopsies, oopsies. And now, like, sorry guys, y'all gotta go. Um, and it's not just that, but that they're wanting to do it super fast, like super fast, given that this accumulated over a lengthy period of time, that now super fast. And I hope that what has come clear through our conversation today is not in a sensible, methodical method, but like all of you, like not that you don't have great skills, not that we're going to do this by occupation, that like those ones we don't need and those ones we do, but basically just, um, yeah, it's not going to be pretty. It's going to be a bit of a bloodbath. We are going to lose good people. We are going to take a hit to our reputation, but we just need to get it right, get the numbers right, and then we'll be okay. And then we'll start fresh.
Yeah, that's basically how they're presenting it, is there's this bulge that they want to leave. They brought in,
They brought him in
they brought him in.
deliberately.
hmm And now it, so what that looks like, will people go back? Will it be H&C claim, humanitarian and compassionate claims? Will it be
Only
refugee
5,000 or
claims?
6,000 of them.
Only, yeah, that'll be processed, right? Like, imagine a million, if a million, what will this look like, right? People on Twitter are talking about like good luck to the Canada Border Services Agency trying to remove a million people. They could just do it by not letting any of them have stat. I mean, it just how, and again, as I kind of said at the outset, it's not even clear if the prime minister will be the prime minister next week, let alone in the spring, let alone next year.
Yeah,
What this will actually look like and how
for
this will
sure.
actually go is going to be a moving and changing target. Um,
For sure. If all of the officers who were processing applications are suddenly going to be bearing arms and becoming enforcement officers, or if we're going to end up with a complete undocumented underclass, like
well, and
measuring the similar.
Remember what Minister Kenny said. If a Trump victory occurs and he follows through on his plans to deport millions of people, some of them may choose Canada. Does like there's so many variables moving around.
Mhm.
And but I guess right now, the message that the government is sending is that they want people to leave.
Yeah.
And we'll have to have
Yeah.
Mikal on also because I don't know what the economics of trying to tell a million people who are working to leave looks like, let
Yeah.
alone the humanitarian side.
Let alone the humanitarian side. And also, like, we talked about this a bit with Mike Moffat. Like, what does this do to Canada's brand? Like, if you are, if we're going to the like best and the brightest strategy for human capital model, what did we just do to that brand? If I were, this top level thinker looking for the best place in the world to be, does Canada look like that place right now when we're saying like, oopsies,
Mhm.
get out and we'll reset in 2 years' time? This does not feel like the desirable location for me. I'd be like, get me out of here. I'm going somewhere that is a little bit less like, who doesn't make a colossal whoopsies on a
Yeah.
vast scale
And
and is
you
not going to
mentioned
just like haphazardly hack away at the workforce and drive away all like it's a brain drain that is like completely what's going to happen to academia, what's going to happen to scholarship, what's going to happen to research in Canada. Just looking at it from that perspective,
yeah. And I
employers.
mean, you were talking about, does this sentiment impact refusals? if you're a visa officer processing work permit or study permit extensions at the processing center in Edmonton, which processes those for the most part, and the message is we want in 2025 close to 1.3 million people to be leaving the country, does that impact
100% it
refusal
does.
rates? Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I have to
Yeah,
imagine that it does,
for sure. I mean, it's like with this H&C that I was talking about today. If there is a doubt, there is no doubt. Like if I'm like, meh, goodbye,
right?
refused. Maybe you'll JR, but probably you won't because it costs $10,000. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
do that.
So that's sort of like, I mean, again, it could change by tomorrow. Um, but practicing, I guess that would be the takeaway. Practicing immigration in 2025, 2026, if this all holds, is going to be practicing where an objective of Canadian immigration law, although not stated in the law, but the government's objection is net population loss.
Yeah. It's sort of, I think that practicing immigration law in 2025 and the balance of 2024 is going to feel like practicing emergency medicine in 2020.
Mhm. It's going to be it'll be interesting.
I think we done it. I think that's
Yeah.
all we needed to say. I think there's a lot left to be said, but I think we've got through the points we wanted to make, huh?
Yeah, yeah, I think we covered it off.
Yeah.
We'll see what new announcement comes next, but yeah.
I don't know what's left to cut, but definitely if you don't already, follow Steve on pretty much anything he does social media wise.
It's really just X and LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to try and create other handles for us for Borderline so that there are easier ways for you to follow our show on Instagram and but anyways, I'm not a social media guru, but we'll see
Yeah.
where we go.
Awesome.
Okay, bye
Bye.
for now.